Hi, I'm Marco Etheridge, and I'm going to read an excerpt from my play, Best Guy on the Crew. We're going to start at the end of scene one, where the boss and Damien are discussing a third guy, Joe, who is the best guy on the crew. The boss. Look, you know the deal. I'm the carrot and you're the stick. Reward and punishment. Two parts of the same circle. Capiche? That's how I set it up, and that's how it is. Damien. That's funny. Does that mean if one of us gets whacked, the other one disappears? You better hope I'm not tempted to find out. And it's bad luck talking like that. Sorry, boss. I got people waiting. What else you want to say to me, Damien? If you're so sure about this guy, Joe, maybe you'd care for a little wager. A little wager like what? A test. I say things go bad for your guy, Joe. He turns on you right quick, curses your name. You got my interest. Go on. You let me make a few waves, cause Joe some trouble. Then we'll see if he's the good soldier like you say he is. You want me to let you cause trouble, something you're very good at? What's in it for me if I do? Give me 1 week. If Joe doesn't turn in a week, I go back to that hellhole of Phoenix. You don't hear no more from me again for a long time. And what if Joe fails the test? What then? Then you let me return. Take my old job as capo, just like the old days. Damn you. You got me curious now. Okay, but here's the rules. You can fuck with Joe, but you can't hurt him. No muscle, you understand me? No permanent physical harm is what I'm saying. You got that? Sure, I got it. Then we have a wager? If it'll get you off my back and get you back to hell and out of my hair, sure, we got a wager. The boss reaches for his grappa, nods his head. Damien lifts his glass of grappa. Salute. Lights go down, curtain, end of scene one.
Hello, everyone. My name is Sarah Edmonds, and I'm the editor-in-chief of For Page and Screen magazine. I'm here today with Marco Etheridge, author of The Best Guy on the Crew. Thank you so much for being here with us today.
Thanks for asking me. I'm glad to be here.
Awesome. Now, I have a feeling I know the answer to this, but I'm going to start with a basic question. What inspired this play?
Well, I mean, obviously the story of Job in the Bible, but I've always thought that it was completely unfair. It was just like such a wrong story. Here's Job, and he is the most faithful servant of the Lord, and yet the Lord in his omnipotence agrees with Satan to test his faith. And I always thought it was just like such a raw deal. So then I imagined, like, yeah, okay, but how do you tell the story and have it not be just, a critique? I thought, oh yeah, slowly you got to be like a mafia crew, like, where trust is always an issue. And it just kind of went from there. And yeah, I mean, you're treading a dangerous line of sacrilege, but dangerous lines are there to be tread. So, or trodden or whatever.
Absolutely. No, I agree. It's kind of funny that you say that because my first ever exposure to the story of Job actually came in grad school. I was not really raised religious, so I was not familiar with Bible stories. And my professor at the time said a very similar thing, like if God is omnipotent, the devil is just kind of winning him over, kind of conning him here. And your story very much kind of hit that same thread in a way that is so entertaining and so engaging and so fun to read. Um, Now, with the kind of mafia twist, one thing I really loved about the play is how your play on the chorus, having kind of like the Goonies in the back be the this Greek chorus. Could you tell me a little bit about like what inspired that, how you went into writing that, why you chose that direction?
Sure. Well, the Greek chorus is such a great device. I mean, obviously, we're like anybody else, I'm standing on the shoulders of giants, and I'm just a little tiny midget because the Greeks just had it down with tragedy and comedy. And of course, there's other people that have done the same thing. Woody Allen, for example, uses it to great effect in a couple of his movies. Um, and I had this image of like, yeah, the bumbling goons kind of, elbowing their way on stage, almost like the Three Stooges, and then going into what is actually classical Euripides meter, the rhymes and everything. That took more time than writing the play, except doing it with profanity and, acting like, goofy made guys, like, that prick. And I saw that as you would see it on stage, or as the audience would see it on stage. And that just was sort of the set piece that made me say, yeah, I think this is going to work, because it's also, it's a trope. And like any trope, it's dangerous. You can take a trope and make it work if you're lucky, and you can take a trope and fall flat on your face too. And I hope that I was lucky here.
I think you were. I think you were. I love the way that it works. And I think one of the reasons, for me at least, reading this script, why the combination of Bible story and mafia kind of tropes, so to speak, works so well is because they both are so familiar. When we talk about the mafia, when you use that language, people have a very concrete image in their heads of what they're picturing, how that looks, how people move, how that works. And I think that that works really well here. I think that it helps give the audience kind of the standing ground of what they can expect, even if you do turn it on its head at times and kind of play around with their expectations. So that's not really a question, it's just a compliment. I think it works very well. Um, so I want to talk a little bit. You mentioned kind of working with meter, working with the rhyme. Was that your first time kind of playing around almost with verse in a script, or is that something that you do frequently?
Not frequently, but I have used the idea of Greek chorus as a narrative device in short stories prior. And obviously, it's a classical, very, very classical instrument in ancient theater. And it just seemed to work, because otherwise, if I've got the goons doing a play-by-play somewhere in there, it starts to become sort of they're telling the story rather than letting the audience view the story. So better that they just shuffle on and do the part of an actual chorus. And it in this case, I think it serves the purpose pretty well. It gives the audience a quick setup, um, and they're funny, I think, so it's not bad to laugh.
Absolutely. Having that comedy really helps avoid some of the potential for repetitiveness. I think it gives the audience something to focus on that's not just like, okay, narration. Yeah, they're very funny. It's fun to read. Now, you've mentioned scripts and short stories. Do you have a preference? Which one did you start with? That's kind of multiple questions in one, but
No, that's a good question too. Primarily, I mean, if I take all of my published work as a whole, I'm a short story writer and to a certain degree novelist as well. But excuse me. But sometimes if if the story that I have in my head, not in the sense of a short story, but if the idea of characters and whatnot really doesn't depend on setting, and it's really, really dialogue focused, then sometimes the better vehicle for that is the stage, because the stage is really set up for a few characters on the stage speaking to each other, speaking to the audience. Um, and we don't get lost in, the birds were flying past the balcony and the sun was setting and the yada, 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 because I really, I really like stripped down theater. I'm a huge fan of theater of the absurd. I mean, like, okay, my idol, Samuel Beckett, who I adore and hate at the same time because was so good. You know, he wrote the original script for Waiting for Godot in French, the bastard, and he's Irish. So he wrote a masterpiece in another language and it debuted in French. Oh, what a miserable genius. I love him. So, and that's that kind of super sparse setting, just a few characters, but it's mesmerizing. And I'm not comparing this to Waiting for Godot by any means, but that idea of the setting and descriptive passages getting in the way of the dialogue. Sometimes I think it's better just to take them out altogether. And the first couple times I tried that, I was really pleased. They were works in progress, but I got the idea that, hey, get this into your head of writing a script instead of a story. And it's really a lot of fun. I really enjoy it.
Absolutely. I know I personally started more as a script writer and transitioned into writing fiction. And I had an opposite experience. I got into fiction. I'm like, I can describe things now. What is this? Um, but
Right?
I love meeting authors who play around with form and kind of discover which works for which story, because I think a lot of people want to do that in their writing. I think a lot of people want to experiment in form, want to go in different directions. And I know just from an editorial perspective, a lot of the scripts that we get have not quite reached that step where people have stripped away the descriptions that are kind of unnecessary for the stage or even the screen when we get screenplays. Um, how did it take you a while to kind of get used to that mindset, or did you find that came naturally to you?
It wasn't as difficult as I might have thought. I mean, if I had thought about it prior, it proved to be not quite as difficult because it strips away so much of the not necessarily extraneous, but extraneous compared to fiction. That you can, it allows, I think, a playwright to really concentrate on the emotions and the dialogue between the characters and nothing else. So that the audience, if you're doing it right, hopefully, can identify with those emotions and that dialogue and find themselves pulled into a situation that's either familiar to them or they can identify with or touches them in some way in their lives so they have some familiarity because I mean that's what theater is. It's people on the stage doing people stuff rather than Marvel. I love Marvel films, don't get me wrong, but fighting the bad guys in the universe and lots of explosions and stuff. And then to take that further, personally, I really like the idea of a play that a community theater could put on with a couple of tables and a chair and a backdrop, or not even a backdrop, just really minimalist theater. Not that there's anything wrong with great production, but a lot of people can't do that. So my aim has always been in the kind of double handful of scripts that I've written is to keep it really, really simple and focus on, what's going on with the characters.
I love that. And I love that the way you look at theater is also very accessible. Anyone can kind of put on that production. And I think that kind of goes back to the roots of storytelling in a way. Stories became to share stories, sometimes share morals, entertain, all of that, generally by word of mouth. So theater itself kind of evolves from that in a way that written stories don't really have that barrier of you have to take the time to sit down, read. It's very isolated. Whereas theater itself is meant to be kind of a community experience, a communal experience. Um, it's interesting. I keep referencing our editorial style because it's always difficult with scripts and screenplays when we kind of read through our submissions, because a lot of the time the feedback that we give is to rejection, so to speak. It's just that plays and scripts, the end product is visual, and we tend to get a lot that don't take advantage of that. But at the same time, we have scripts like yours and like other ones that we've published in the past that are dialogue action, mostly dialogue. And so it's a weird balance to say, oh, well, is that visual enough too? And striking the balance is really difficult when writing a script because you can have people speaking to each other on stage and then you have people embodying characters on stage, and they're two very different things,
Mhm.
in my opinion, at least. And I'm curious what this may seem like an odd bridge, but I'm curious what your approach is to writing a script when it comes to movement directions and action lines, talking the characters, talking the actors through the motions, because I have personal views on that, and I think they probably align with yours, but I'm curious as to your approach to that.
If you were, yeah, it's a good question. Thank you. If you know the omnipotent eye was watching me, I'm working at where I'm standing now at my stand-up desk where I usually write standing up, and I have to work alone, which, yeah, almost everybody. Um, but you would see me running around the room or sitting down and talking out loud to myself because I have to. When I do a story, I don't always do. When I'm writing a story, a short story or fiction, typical fiction, um, if the characters are doing a certain movement and I'm describing the movement, like perhaps an action story where two characters are physically fighting or something, I have to do the movements myself so that I can make sure, okay, the left hand, right hand, that I'm getting it accurate. I'm a real stickler for details because if this is an aside, but if I always feel like as a writer, if I can sell my reader or the audience on the details, they will then believe whatever larger fiction is going on, whether it's post-apocalyptic or whatever. But the details are very important because somebody in the audience is going to know about that thing, and they're going to say, "Oh no, that's not right." Um, Guns, weapons. Um, really good authors, really skilled published authors. I'm not going to name them, but I catch them making mistakes that should not be made about us. If you're going to be specific, then it's incumbent on you to know exactly what you're talking about. When it comes to the play thing, I have to know what the characters are doing. So if the boss is going to sit down and drink grappa, I'm probably going to have to sit down and pretend that I'm drinking a glass of grappa to see, like, is that going to work in the context with the dialogue? So I tend to move around a lot more, like physically move around and then run back to the keyboard. Oh no, that doesn't work. Change that. Um, and I definitely speak out loud a lot more when I'm writing a script. Sometimes I'll do dialogue in fiction out loud to see, does it sound like dialogue or does it sound like me writing dialogue? Because the two are so completely different. And I hate it when you're reading something that obviously that character wouldn't say. And even more than fiction with scripts for me, it's really important to get into the character's head and make sure that what he or she is saying is in character throughout the whole length of the script. Um, if they come to a revelation, that might change, but it also has to fit with the revelation. They can't, if they have a life-changing experience, they can't then be talking like they were talking before the life-changing experience. So there's a lot of blah blah blah, and you know, um, my wife makes sure the door's shut and goes, "Oh, he's talking again. Oh my God!" And it probably looks idiotic, actually, but
I've been there. I tend to make the same facial expressions as I'm describing what I'm writing. I can't write in public for that because I find myself like grimacing and smiling and I'm like people are gonna think I'm insane. Um, so I completely understand. Um, I think it's important to do that as far as the movement with scripts because you have to have an idea of space. The story takes place in a set space. So understanding how that space works with what you're putting on the page is really important as well. Um, Now, do you ever take into consideration when you're writing kind of leaving room at all for the actors, the hypothetical future actors, to play around with the characters in any way?
oh, I'm totally on board with that. I would love to see people ad-libbing or, yeah, no, I'm not going to be that guy in the back of the room at the first performance going, "That's not what I wrote, you bastards," because that's their art. I don't want to take away from their art. I mean, I definitely take great pleasure and pride in being a creator. That's very important to me and keeps me on the narrow edge of sanity. So it's important for the world. But at the same time, I don't want to restrict a stage director's inspiration or an actor's. It might work, it might not work. That's what ad-libbing is all about. But if they can make it better, groovy, go for it. Yeah.
Have you ever seen one of your scripts performed? Have you ever had one performed? Sorry.
No. I'm
Hopefully in the
looking
future.
I'm looking forward to that though.
Yes, hopefully in the future. Um, Now, with your short stories, to jump a little bit away from scripts for the moment, do you have any specific genres that you like to work in? Any themes that you play around with frequently? Anything like that?
They come and go, and I do. I write. I think it's fair to say that my regular readers would say that I'm all over the board. And that's true. I mean, I write spec fiction, I write literary fiction. Um, that said, I tend to get onto an idea, and I very likely will follow that through with more than one story, more than one short story. Um, Two themes lately have been I was in the US not too long ago, a couple years ago, and um, I spent a good deal of time on the West Coast, the world of tech. And what was happening in a couple of cities there that I know very, very well is that one, I didn't recognize them very, very much, was disturbing. And also that the people who work in the city couldn't afford to live in the city. Teachers, garbage people, cops, baristas, whatever. They had to live outside the city and commute into the city because nobody could afford to live in the damn city. Um, and I got this image of the shining city on the hill and all the poor people living in the camps around the shining city on the hill. And there was a series of stories that came out of that. Very dystopian, near dystopian, the idea of, the rich oligarchy, which has some basis in fact now. And another thing that's been really creating a lot of buzz for me is the idea of the hero's return, not necessarily the hero's journey, because we always hear the hero's journey. There's the hero, he or she descends in the underworld. They meet the goddess. They get the thing. They come out. They give the news to the village. Yay, everybody's saved. But then usually there's no room left for the hero. Nobody really wants the hero around afterwards because they weren't brave enough to go, but the hero did. And the hero kind of reminds them all the time of, we kind of fell short. He or she took the brunt for us, took the bullet, whatever. Um, so that's produced a bunch of stories, and who knows what the next thing will be. But
Speaking of the next thing, do you have any pieces coming out for publication lately? Any projects you want to talk about specifically? Anything our viewers, listeners should be aware of?
well, it's been a pretty busy time in my world. In fact, I've got them right here because I have to have them organized. I had 3 stories go live in the last week and a half, which is a bit. One was a microfiction, 100 words or less, whole story in 100 words, which if any of you out there in interview land have ever tried it, it's a lot harder than it sounds. So that was fun. And a hero's journey where the young would-be hero meets the old hero who's female, which was fun. It's nice to turn those tropes on their head, the young male character coming to the established hero who's like, nah, you don't want to do this. It's a crappy life, and you're not going to get any reward out of it. And so that one was just published. And I have a really long format story going right now. I'm really excited about that. Has not been published, it's not complete yet, but it's definitely the idea of 2 inept and pretty unwilling heroes getting sucked into another world through a mysterious package of marijuana that got delivered accidentally, and discovering that They have inner resources that they never thought that they had. And my son is helping me with that. He's my collaborator for my son's an adult, kind of a Magic the Gathering sort of nerdy guy. And he keeps me on the path. Whenever I have younger characters, I'll bounce it off him. And he's a huge resource for me because he's like, I'm like, what was it yesterday? Nobody wears flip-flops anymore, man. They wear slips. You guys, slips. You got to change that. It's like, that's a great detail. Okay, thanks.
Oh gosh, I'm just having flashbacks. My mom works with children and she started using that term and I'm like, I don't even know what that means. Like,
Right, right.
yeah.
I'm always learning new stuff. That's right. That's good because I'm not young, so it keeps me keeps the new synapses firing. That's really important.
Mm, I understand. Now, working with your son on writing stories, kind of tell me a bit about how that came about. I don't know. I'm very solitary. I'm always like, I don't want anyone to look at this. So when I hear people are like, I'm sharing this, I'm bouncing ideas off, I'm always curious, kind of like, how did that come about? Do you find it fun? Has it ever caused tension? That kind of stuff.
Right. Yeah, that's a solid question. Normally I never do that. No one, not my, nobody sees a first draft. Does not happen. It came about with an idea he actually gave me for a story, which he's pretty good at. He'll say, hey, how about blah, 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 blah. I was thinking about this. You should write this. And the first time I thought, that's a pretty great idea. I like that. So I wrote it and he got credit for, story idea. That happened a couple of times or I would bounce details off him. It got to be it just sort of happened. It wasn't, there was no tension there. We've always been tight and he's a brilliant kid. I mean, everybody says that about the kid, but he's probably a lot smarter than I am. And so when I would get to a certain thing that I wasn't sure of, I'd just bounce it off of him. Hey, what do you think of this? Just a snippet and get his feedback. Well, then we co-wrote a story, which he actually got publishing credit for. That was really fun. Right. I mean, I was doing most of the typing muscle work, but the story was his start to finish. And I helped him refine it, but it was definitely a co-authored story, which I've only done with one other person. So far, no tension. He knows I'm the writer and he's the idea guy. Our roles are pretty well defined and we have a lot of fun with it. And he's not scared to say, no, I don't think so. I don't think that's working. Or I don't think he would say that or that's not how that works. And I usually listen because he knows a lot about a large body of stuff that I'm not familiar with. So he's a good resource.
That's awesome. Yeah, I've never collaboratively written a story, but getting feedback like that can be so essential. It can be so, so helpful. Writing groups, I know for me, have been a huge resource with that, kind of finding people you trust to work with. Not usually for a first draft, like you said, but for later stages of the story. Um, no. How was collaboratively writing with someone else? I'm just personally curious because I've always kind of wanted to, but
It
I've been
was,
scared.
well, it was hard. And I know this person, she's a co-editor with me on another zine project of ours. And she's a really skilled writer and I trust her. And we like each other. And still, it was hard. Um, yeah, we're writers. We're solitary creatures when it comes to writing. I mean, I think most writers, if you said, tell me 5 things about being a writer, solitary is going to come up every time or almost every time, my opinion. But we had to write a collaborative. She said, there's this project. It requires collaboration. I want to do it. You're the only person I can think of I'd want to do it with. So obviously I was honored, but she was buttering me up as well. And I went for it. And it was very structured. Every other paragraph had to be by the next writer. Yeah. And first of all, it took a whole lot longer than writing a normal short story, whatever that is. And then we were, constantly bouncing stuff back and forth, and it didn't always bounce softly. I mean, we definitely had conflict in a constructive way. No, there was no, screaming at each other or anything, but we had to together craft one story. And it's really interesting to see how someone else works, to see how they respond to your paragraph and then how you respond to theirs. And we got into a flow with it, and it was a really good experience. But it would not be one I would enter into lightly again. I mean, I would have to really know the person and have some ground rules, I guess, before, starting out.
That's good to know. That's good to know. I never, like I said, I've never done it. I've always been curious. Um, Writing is such a personal thing. So to kind of open yourself up in that way and to have the trust of someone else opening themselves up in that way as well. Um, it just sounds really special and slightly terrifying, if I'm being completely honest.
No, terrifying is the right word. Who was it? Oh, I think it was Hemingway. Said writing's easy. All you do is open a vein and let it bleed out or something. I'm paraphrasing, but
Mhm.
but overly dramatic as a lot of Hemingway stuff is, except there's a big kernel of truth in that, I think, in that I think any writer that's writing something honestly, that's really going after something, we're cutting ourselves open and letting some of ourselves out onto the page. We have to. I think that's an integral part of the process, unless you're writing crap. I mean, no offense against the romance writers out there, but if you're doing the same bodice buster every time, I don't think you're necessarily opening your heart onto the page. But that said, yeah, I think we throw a precious piece of ourselves in anything that's any good, and then it makes us vulnerable. I mean, so sharing that with somebody is pretty huge exercise in trust.
Mhm. Absolutely, absolutely. That makes me think, this is slightly a personal anecdote that might not have to do with the interview. But I actually just last fall, spring, um, taught creative writing for the first time at my job. I teach at a university down near Philadelphia. Um, and that was an experience having kind of 15 undergraduate students opening themselves up, writing. And I loved it. I loved it. I loved all of their work. But kind of cultivating that community where these students, who some of them knew each other, some of them didn't. I knew like two people in the room beforehand, kind of getting them to be vulnerable in that way. And it was an interesting balance how some people were ready to dive in and were just kind of like, this is more personal to me. Like, this is where it came from in my life. This is me on a plate, so to speak. And then
Mm.
other people who were much more tentative, maybe haven't done creative writing before, kind of coming into that realization like, oh, I can write something funny, but it still has to have heart and still has to have part of my heart in it. It was just a really, really humbling experience, if I'm being completely honest, like as a teacher, kind of finding a way to help them find their voices. And I'm not saying all of the writing that came out of the class was perfect. I'm not saying all of the writing I've ever done is perfect, but um, it's really hard to kind of create that community and that environment. But I love so much when people are willing to do it, especially new writers, especially students, because it's not something they're comfortable with a lot of the time. And it's certainly not something that the university classroom kind of compels them to do frequently. It's kind of an outlier in that way. Um, so that's just my sad little anecdote that doesn't have much to do with anything.
Oh, it does. No, I disagree. I think that it does. Um, in two specific ways that I can think of. One is that it must be very difficult. I imagine it would be difficult to create that room full of trust to allow the students to serve up part of themselves on a plate, which is what we have to do. And at the same time, encourage them to do so. But that you've got the dynamic of yourself as the teacher. You got 15 students that don't necessarily know each other, all in this cocoon of trust, and it's got to be maintained. But it's also really important that we create new writers somehow because we need stories. We human beings need stories. I believe this to my core. We have them because we've always needed them. We started on the campfire, like you talked about, the oral stories. That was history, that was morals, it was the teaching, all of that wrapped into a story. And we need stories now more than ever. It's really important. So we got to get writers from somewhere. Somebody's got to do it.
Absolutely, absolutely. Speaking of getting writers out into the world, you had mentioned you were a co-editor on a magazine. Tell me a little bit about that.
Ah, great. A plug. The yeah, it's online zine. It's called Hodgepodge Literature and Art, and we started out with a group of people. Hey, let's do this, and I don't know what we're doing, and but now we're in our seventh issue, and we've got thousands of downloads and readers, no paywalls, and we work in a collaborative process where we get a guest visual artist or guest visual artists in some issues. We offer up their art as prompts for stories. Each guest writer gets to choose a prompt, and they have to write a story that in some way, whatever that image or piece of art evokes for them, but they have to tie it to the story somehow. I mean, there's got to be at least a nebulous thread, or else we're going to not accept the story. And it's been really popular. And we try to have a really, really, because we're collaborative, and that's very important to us, we try to have a very close relationship with our guest writers and to nurture them into further issues. And so far, our response has been very positive. We've been at it for this is a third year now. Unbelievable to me, but there it is. And it's a hell of a lot of work, and it's also very rewarding. So nobody gets paid, and we can't pay our writers. And I wish we could because the world should pay writers, but maybe someday we'll get to that. I hope so.
Absolutely. That sounds so fun. I'll have to look it up. Maybe write a piece to submit to you guys.
I am going to invite you to be a guest writer. I can guarantee it.
Thank you.
How the
That
collaboration works. The little ripples go out and we meet other people.
that sounds like so much fun. Do you have any open submission calls at the moment? We'll continue the plug.
We do. We do. We have, in fact, what's the date today? Yeah, they just went open for the next issue, which will come out. And we just released an issue this month on the 17th, our seventh issue. So we kind of do a twofold thing. We have submissions, regular submissions for Drabbles and Flash based on two images. Write either a Drabble or Flash. If you're energetic, write both if you want to. And from those submissions, we obviously can reject or accept. And then we publish those people. And then we bring those people, those new writers, into our collaboration. And from those people and from our writing community, we invite guest writers to do full-length short stories based on a series of images. So we kind of try and bring new writers along, not necessarily new to the craft, but new to us. Sometimes they're also new to the craft. We work really closely with them on editorial stuff. We try to make the editorial process very collaborative and hopefully very helpful. So far, our feedback is good because, that's a delicate process, as you well know. Everybody gets really like, oh, it's my precious baby and you're messing with it. So it's been a huge learning experience for me how to have that gentle, supportive, and yet guiding editorial touch, which I attempt to have anyway. I strive for, don't always have, but.
Absolutely. I definitely understand that. I know. I feel like I've been two different kinds of writers where some people are very precious about their work. They're like, I love that word. I want all of these words. And other people are kind of just like, oh, you want to publish it? Do whatever you want. And I've been that person on both sides of the coin. I know for me, kind of getting to see behind the screen, getting to kind of work on the editorial side of it has changed my perspective in accepting feedback and receiving editorial feedback as a writer. It's kind of made me to be a little more confident in saying no, I don't want to make that change, but also more receptive to bigger picture changes rather than just kind of like no, that has to be there. It's like maybe it doesn't. I'm curious, have you seen any change in your own work? Doing the editorial side versus how you approach writing or how you receive feedback?
Absolutely. Both in how I've always tried to be, and usually I am very receptive to editorial comments. Much more now so because I can wear both hats, or I have worn both hats, or I do wear both hats. I have had experiences with editors that didn't work out because they really wanted me to write a story that they should have written themselves. It's like if you want that much change, you should you shouldn't have accepted the story, and B, you should just go write the story yourself, you know. But for the most part, my experience has been positive. Even the rejection, I get rejections like everybody else, lots of them. There's just the form rejection, right? No, sorry, please feel free to submit again. Okay, great. You got to get a thick skin in this business or you're not going to survive. So, that's par for the course. New writers, you're going to get rejected a lot. Get over it. You know, I've got 200 published short stories. I get rejected all the time. I get rejected 10 times at least for almost on average for every story that's accepted. But what's gold is when I get a rejection with feedback. That's not a rejection. That's a gold mine. This is what an editor thinks of my work, and I can look at it and see what's legit, what's not legit, what I'm willing to change, but I can do a revision. It's free feedback. That's great. Sometimes they're kind of weird comments, but lots of times they're really on point. It's like, I don't get why this character is doing this, or this is unclear to me. And then there's a danger when you're a writer. We know the story. We know the story front to back. So I assume, I don't know if anybody else is guilty, that every reader knows the story, which makes us sometimes, I think, blind to some bits of the story where we're not being clear because we know it. So, maybe it does need a little more explanation, or why did he do that? Why did she do that? And then, of course, giving editorial comments. I think it's impossible to be a conscientious editor and to be very careful with someone else's work and respectful, and then not take the flip side of that into my dealings with editors who are critiquing my work. So it's all helpful. Yeah, it all builds a better balance of just being open to change and being open to revision, because revision is important. We don't always get it right on the first or second or third draft. And that's why we have drafts.
Absolutely, absolutely. I know one thing that kind of being in an editorial position opened my eyes to is the sometimes form rejection of, oh, it's just not a good fit right now. Because we always try to give some amount of feedback in our rejections at our magazine. It's often not a lot. Sometimes if we love the story, but just really it's one thing, we'll give more feedback and tell them to resubmit to us. But sometimes it's like the story is amazing and we love it, but it doesn't make any sense with the other stories that we want to accept. And it's like sometimes that's it. And I always before took that to mean, okay, well, that's a form rejection. It's like sometimes it's not. Sometimes it really is that simple that it just doesn't work for us or it's just not a fit for us. And sometimes it's hard because the way we do our editorial process is everyone votes on the stories. And sometimes we have like I'll adore a story and then two other editors are like, we like it but not now, and it kills me to write that rejection because like I love the story so much but I've been outvoted. And I'm like, it's as simple as that. It's definitely made me less harsh on myself, I think, with rejection, having to send those rejections, because I know I don't think we've ever had a story where I'm like, I hate this, don't send us this. Like I've never had that reaction to a submission. And realizing that and looking at my own rejections, God, I get so many rejections. I got one this morning actually. And saying, okay, well, the rejection doesn't mean that they hated it. It sounds obvious, but that was a switch that I had in my head. And I think that's a switch that a lot of writers starting out kind of have to take if they want to keep moving as well. It's not a critique on your ability as a writer. It's just the story at the moment for that person, and that's all it is.
It's a hard lesson. It's a that first. I mean, there's the joy of those first few acceptances, and there's also the heartbreak of a lot of rejections, and yeah, thick skin. Not. I know it's my baby. I know it's my precious creation. Not everybody's going to love it. It's not always going to fit. As you say, they've got 10 stories about human interaction and one story that I wrote about, a dystopia. It just doesn't fit with the other stories. Okay, that's fine. Um, I've had very few like real rejections. I got one that the people just like, we are not interested in this story at all. It's like, wow, you didn't need to say that, but okay, I'll never submit to you again because that's judgmental editing and I don't deal with that. And there's lots of other journals out there. But two, it's like I've never gotten to that place where as an editor, I've read stories that I wouldn't write for one thing, and I might not like the subject matter or the way it's treated, but if the craft is good and that author believes in it, that doesn't mean just because I don't necessarily identify with that story that it's not a good story. That's a hard thing to sort out. But I've also been outvoted. We do a similar process, and I've been outvoted on just recently on a story that I was like, no, we have to accept the story. Look what she did. This is great. It's like, nope. It's like, okay, pouty pout, pout, pout. But, it was a good story too.
Yeah, it's definitely heartbreaking having to say no to those. I understand for sure. Um, so now I'm curious, do you have any questions for me or about our magazine? Anything like that?
Well, I'm thrilled that, you accepted my story. Um, and actually, that's going to tie into my question. Yes. Oh, okay. Now I'll get to
We're good.
what is the deal with Philadelphia? So here's the thing.
Okay.
I was just there, as a matter of fact, on my way back from the U.S. in March. We flew back out of Philadelphia,
Mhm.
and I said, "No, we got to spend some time." Because I've traveled a lot,
Mhm.
but I've never hung out in Philadelphia. I'm an American. I've never been to Philadelphia. Liberty Well, blah 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 blah. Had a great time. Had 2 days. Stayed up by Temple University. Really sketchy neighborhood. It was great. Had a great time. Rode the metro and went to saw the stuff, but saw a lot of Philadelphia on foot. Really had a good time. My question though is, I've also dealt with about four, counting you guys. I've dealt with about four Philadelphia literary journals, and they have all been great. They've all been like super interactive, really responsive, and really fun. And I'm just like, no offense to Philadelphia, but Philadelphia doesn't jump to the top of anybody's literary list that I knew of. But I'm definitely changing my opinion about that. So, like, is there like a scene there? Or, yeah, it's cool.
Well, I'm glad that you've had a great experience. Absolutely. There's a huge author scene in Philadelphia. I love it. It's something I only found out about. Wow, I say only, it's probably been 5 years. But a few years ago, we have a lot of really great independent publishing houses, literary magazines, tons of author readings and author events. My first book was published by a local press, 30 West Publishing House. I'll give them a shout out, based in
Cool.
Philadelphia.
I've
And
actually heard of them.
yeah, yeah, I love them. They're fantastic. They really do a lot of work with other organizations to host events. The Bring Up Blanket reading series is something that happens in Philly. It's literally just when the weather's nice, you go out and there's reading events. We've done poetry in the parks, tons of author readings, author signings in the area. I'm actually gearing up to go to a queer book fair, not in Philly, but in one of the nearby cities as well to do that. So we have a really great community. It takes a
Yeah,
little bit of poking around to get there, but
I
it's
didn't
fun.
know. I thought it was an anomaly, the first acceptance, and then I went, I was invited to their launch party, and it was great. But it's also, it's more than just that it's a cool scene. It's like, to me, my experience, it's really friendly and really interactive, but it's like they're not taking themselves too seriously. I mean, it's serious literature. I don't mean that, but there's not a lot of pretension, I guess is what I'm saying. So.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I agree. I agree with that. If I'm gonna give a shout out to someone lots of people probably know in the book world, Eric Smith. He's a literary agent from Philadelphia. He was actually my mentor in my graduate program as well. And I feel like he embodies the Philadelphia literary scene in a way because the introduction that the head of the program gave us to him was like, you're going to look at him and say, no one could be that nice. He's hiding something. He's actually just that nice. And he's one of the coolest guys you will ever meet. He's so nice. I don't like we don't work together, we don't talk much, but every once in a while I'll come across something in the literary world in my own career and I'll be like, I don't know how this works. I've never encountered this, and I'll just shoot him a quick email. He's always so helpful. So shout out to Eric. He just started his own literary magazine, or not magazine, literary agency here in Philly. So shout out to him. But yeah, everyone is so, so nice. I've never encountered anyone who I would call haughty or in any way in Philly. And maybe I've been lucky, but I'd like to think we've got a good community here. Yeah, so I'm glad you've had a good experience and hopefully we can keep that up. Um, Now I want to ask you my final question of the night, day. I don't know, it's morning here. I think it's afternoon for you. Um, so it's pretty generic, but if you could give one piece of advice to other writers, either established or aspiring, what would it be?
Besides all the usual extortions to, have faith in yourself and, all that great nebulous advice. If if you want to be a writer and you have that little inkling in your head of an idea for a character or an idea for a setting or situation, write them down that very second. As soon as you have that idea, write it down and create whatever, a bag, a box, a computer file, whatever it is, of interesting idiosyncratic characters that you may have thought up and situation settings that you may have thought up. And there will come a point weeks, months later where one of those characters will suddenly smash into one of those situations and you're going to have a story. It's character for me. It's a character and it's a setting or situation. You mash them together and see what happens. It might very well not be what you think is going to happen, but if they mesh, they'll sort of take over and tell you what they want to do. But you got to listen. It's like lots of times I'm writing at the keyboard, but I'm just sort of there typing stuff out because the characters and story are telling me what they're going to do. And when I don't listen, I write crap. And when I do listen, sometimes I write something that's worth reading.
Fantastic advice. Thank you so much. And thank you so much again for being here, for doing this. If anyone listening wants to read Marco's story, you can find it in For Page and Screen. You can go on our little website. It's a wonderful time. I hope you all enjoy it and read it. Thank you again.
Thank you so much for having me. It's an absolute pleasure.